Chapter 27. As Dan was about to open the book, they heard a knock at the door.
"Who's that?"
Malou asked, turning her head.
"Are we expecting anyone?"
"I don't think we are," Damien replied. "Unless it's your tour guide." He got up from his seat to let the visitor in. "Hello, everyone," Damien said cheerfully, walking in as if he owned the place. "Have I come in at a bad time?" "There's always a promise of interesting times ahead when you come onto the scene, Damienos," Dan remarked with a slight shrug of his shoulders. Damienos, dressed to the hilt with a grey suit, white shirt, pink tie, pranced his way to the fireplace and hung his elbow on the mantel. He looked as debonair and aloof as his present persona seemed to require. Dan and Malou stared at him. "And who are you supposed to be this time?" Dan asked, looking at him up and down. "Let's say I shall guide you through one of the city's most alluring places and be the friend you may need." "All right, if you wish," Dan sniggered. "But first, let's see what the book has in store for us, shall we?" He shot a smiling glance in Malou's direction. She nodded. This time, Dan decided to read the passage aloud. "Your tasks, thus far, have led you both to the parts of your character that needed reinforcing or that needed awakening in the face of difficulties. In all things you will need humbleness, humility to accept your fate, humility to be tolerant towards others, humility in the patience you will display, humility while facing your problems and your victories, and humility when attaining your goal. However, never forget that humility or humbleness of character is by no means debasing or demeaning. You should stand tall and proud of your accomplishments." Dan looked up at Damienos first and then turned to Damien when he closed the book. "I don't know if this place, with all of its opulence, is designed to humble people like Malou and me, but it certainly cut me down to size." Damien smiled before replying, "Yes, the rich decor, the gold trimmings, and the crystal chandeliers have a way of making one feel diminished somehow, doesn't it?"
"But did you know that the wealth displayed in every corner of this duke's house was acquired at the sweat of the most humble of people?"
Solangi noted. "You mean this was a duke's residence?" Malou asked.
"Yes, in fact it's one of the few residences that has been restored to its former grandeur and refurbished as a hotel in 1909. The Duke of Crillon was apparently a gentle fellow who didn't squander his wealth as many of his contemporaries did. He was known to be a brave soldier in his time, and that's perhaps why his house had been preserved and now restored."
Pensive for a moment, Malou then said, "And what are we supposed to do here?" "Oh, nothing in particular here," Damien said, now turning to rest his shoulders against the mantel and crossing his arms over his chest. "But there is a famous place in the city where history has demonstrated that humility had an immense role to play in cutting a gifted man down to size, to use your expression, Dan." "Who's that?" Dan asked. "Why don't we go and pay him a visit?" Damien suggested in reply.
"As interesting as it sounds," Solangi said, "I think the both of us will stay here and wait for your return."
She smiled at her husband. "Absolutely," Damien agreed, "and we'll take care of keeping the book safe while you visit Paris." Once again, before realizing what was happening, Dan, Malou and Damienos were transported to Montmartre at the heart of Paris. Located at the foot of the Basilica of the Sacred Heart, the neighbourhood is one of the visual pleasures and one that lives day and night from the proceeds of sexual or sensual temptations. Perhaps two of the best recognised places in the area are the Moulin Rouge and the Les Falaise. "Why are we here?" Dan asked, looking up at the illuminated windmill of the Moulin Rouge. "This is like Vegas." "Perhaps one should say Vegas is like Montmartre in many ways," Damienos countered. The streets were crowded with tourists and people gawking at the billboards and at the many posters advertising the shows inside these cabarets and nightclubs. Malou was amazed at the displays and the freedom with which some of the women in the streets flaunted their bosoms at the passers-by. "This is something else," she whispered to Dan. "Why do you think Damienos took us down here?" "I think we have to wait to see what happens." And Dan had been right, for a moment later they were standing in the same spot in front of the cabaret, but apparently 150 years earlier, when a small man, not much taller than a gnome, wearing a bowler hat and a longish coat, came out of the Moulin Rouge with a canvas rolled up his arm. Dan looked at him and grabbed Malou's hand. "You know who this is?" she asked her. "Not a clue." "I think that's Toulouse-Lautrec," Dan replied, smiling at the man. "How very kind of you to recognise me, sir," Toulouse said, stepping in front of the couple. "Are you friends of my parents, perhaps?" "Oh no, we aren't, Mr. Lautrec. We are I mean, I am an admirer of your paintings.
Ah, I see. And what about you, my dear?
He looked up at Malou. Do you also know me for my art or for my deformity, perhaps? Malou didn't know how to respond.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know anything about you, Mr. Lautrec.
It's Count de Toulouse-Lautrec, my dear. But as you can see, an infernal malady has seen to it that I grew in mind but not in physique, and so here I am, doing what I love, painting and sketching my favourite subjects.
Were you going to leave without me, mon amère?
A tall girl with flaming red hair burst out as she came running out of the Moulin Rouge to stand beside Toulouse. I was, Toulouse replied. I've had enough of looking at you for one night. Why don't you crawl back into your hole? Agape, both Malou and Dan couldn't believe that a count could talk to the poor creature in such a fashion.
Aren't you going to introduce me?
The woman asked, seemingly unfazed by Toulouse's degrading remarks. I wouldn't want the stains of your name damaging the minds of these good people, Toulouse said, and since you're probably emptied every glass in sight, I don't think you would remember their names in the morning.
I do love you for your nasty temper, my little Toulouse, she replied. I am Louise Weber, my dear sir, she said, flashing a smile to Dan, and I am also better known as Le Goulou of this cabaret and the one dancer who made French can-can and what it is today.
Are you really? Malou blurted. Do not doubt her prowess, Mrs. Politano. La Goulou is an original whore of Paris, the one that has made my life a living hell, but a comfortable one in the knowledge that I can take her to my bed whenever I feel the need or whenever I lack inspiration to capture other subjects on canvas. But how do you know our name? Dan asked, still befuddled by talking to such a grand artist and count to boot.
Although I must admit, I didn't place you at first. Damianos had told me we would meet sometime, and the time seems to be presently.
Besides, nothing is more important than a name, contrary to what Shakespeare once thought, Toulouse replied, cracking a smile. And now, why don't you accompany to my lodgings before Miss Weber decides to have more of a fuss than necessary? Yes, why don't we? Damiano said, suddenly showing up out of among the ghostly figures crowding the sidewalk. Leaving La Goulou standing and waving in front of the cabaret, Dan and Malou accompanied Toulouse, Damianos in tow, to his small apartment located a few streets down from the Moulin Rouge. The little man climbed the stairs of the rambling building with difficulty, but still smiled. I've always hated stairs, but if one wants to be where one needs to be, a price has to be paid. As he unlocked the door and invited his guests inside, Malou couldn't help but gasp at the mess. Beside a bed, which seemed to be the centrepiece of the small place, there was an easel planted near the window, a table encumbered of pots and tubes of paint, and a narrow counter along the far wall that probably served as a kitchen. Have a seat, Toulouse said, indicating a couple of chairs tucked under the windowsill. I will not offer you what I don't have, but only a short conversation will probably suffice to show you some hospitality. How did you end up here in this place, being a count and all? Malou asked as soon as she sat down on the chair nearest to the canvas. Very good question, Toulouse said, and the answer is simply because this is where I want to be, where I can be close to a neighbourhood I love, and where I can do whatever I please whenever I please. And you prefer this sordid apartment to a room in your family's residence? Dan asked. No, Mr. Politano, it is not a matter of preference really, but a matter of understanding of what's best for one's growth. Toulouse paused. Do you truly think I would be able to paint and sketch La Goulou or any other of my subjects sitting in the plush surroundings of my family's residence? Dan shook his head and looked out the window. You see, the same as you soon will. I had to learn to walk again and live with the imperfection life had bestowed upon me. Therefore I had to understand and accept the importance of my gift. It was an excuse in humility, yes, but it was also what gave me the freedom to live the life I desired. Dan turned to face the little man who had now taken his hat and coat off. But I will not be deformed or bear an infirmity such as you did, so where is the comparison? Aha, yes, I quite understand your reticence, but like you, I was a young man of great promise until the disease took away my ability to grow. Yes, you will have the chance to restore your body to former stature only if you seek humbler and more sedate interests in life, while restoring your strength. Your mind needs to be fed such as your body does. Don't let it starve, Mr. Politano. Does it mean that you're suggesting for me to divert my sports abilities or interests to some other things like painting or writing? Toulouse guffed. No, my dear sir, nothing like that, unless of course you have a talent that has yet to be flourished. No. What I was suggesting was to take interest in the people surrounding your life, take time to know them all anew. You love your wife and children, but you deserve to make money, to avoid the troubles your father once faced. Has to take second place in your future. The wealth you have seen at the Duke's residence, the opulence you seem to despise now, would be attainable at the cost of your happiness. The happiness you could find in spending time with the ones who love you dearly. Like taking the kids to the skating rink instead of going skiing with Heath and Dante. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely that, Mr. Politano. Besides which, a dinner at the restaurant or a holiday with your wife, reigniting the tender moments that united you initially, wouldn't be a bad idea either.
And with a snap of his fingers, Damianos brought Dan and Malou back to their suite at the Hotel de Clarion, where Damien and Solangi were waiting for them. "I want to go home," were Dan's first words once he and Malou had regained their seats on the sofa in front of the fireplace.